My name is Srinidhi Rao. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Aegon Life. So at Aegon Life, basically we are trying to create India's first and only digital life insurance company. So digital life insurance for digital India. That's what we go after. So what it means is that the customer who is now becoming a lot more digitally savvy than 5 years ago, right? So we are available for him or her right at on those platforms that he or she is very comfortable with, and then she can go and decide what to purchase and how to purchase right on those platforms and actually complete the entire purchase digitally on the spot without any paper upload or no document upload, nothing. And a company where insurance company where the underwriter is not a person but an algorithm, right? That's what we're trying to build. And prior to this, I was working with two startups, and as one of as a founding member. The one immediately before was the math company, where we were helping organizations to scale analytically, both from the perspective of creating a lot of analytics, whose insights they can consume and take the right decisions, as well as helping them through the change management that is required in the organization, so that they can get value out of that analytics. Prior to that, I was leading the retail and CPG portfolio for a company called Mu Sigma, which is again it was an analytics startup at that point in time, where we helped a lot of Fortune 500 companies adopt analytics way of taking decisions. Prior to that, I was a bunch of management consulting firms in the US, predominantly based out of Washington DC. And from a personal life perspective, so my wife and I have a daughter, 6-year-old, growing up very fast. And I'm very passionate about about badminton, about bicycling, and also playing with her in different places. And also I'm a habit hiker. I wherever I can go, mountaineering, hiking, etc. I am always there. So if you look at all the companies over the last say 50 years that have done very well across industry, right? There are a few common traits, right, that have differentiated the good ones from the bad. And of course, some of you would have read Jim Collins and other great authors who have actually abstracted some of the great some of the common factors across good companies versus great companies. Right? But what I have seen firsthand, right, based on my consulting experience, where I have seen tens of companies, in terms of how they work. One thing is that at the topmost level, right? Does the company have a single-minded focus on exactly how they want to add value to this world? So is that vision super clear, so that they can align the entire organizational workforce, both people, technology, and all the other resources, right, into towards one direction? That's one thing that is absolutely common across all of them. If there is confusion or if there is dichotomy about exactly where we fit into the overall ecosystem and what is the value that we are adding to the world and why we need to exist in the first place, then it's a recipe for disaster. So that's the first one. So single-minded focus on one particular goal or vision or whatever you call it. Generally, vision is what we go after because it's like a little more long-termish kind of a thing, and then that boils down into few yearly goals. That's one. Second one is, once you have that single-minded vision towards something, then that comes the execution aspect. Can you get the right people on board, right, with the right skill set and the right attitude and so on and so forth, and make them work together towards that vision? Right? So an individual being a great person is one thing, but a bunch of great individuals working together to produce a common result is something completely different. Right? So it requires a completely different skill set on the part of the leader in order to get that. Right? So can you hire the right people and rally them towards that one success? And thirdly, once you have these two things in place, right, third one is equally important, is can you figure out where your product fits in terms of what is the value that you are trying to solve for the customer, and is that value important enough for the customer and monetizable for you and do it profitably for you, right? So these are the three things that have to come in together, so that you have the right long-term vision and you have the right people, but you don't figure out the product market fit, where that we can produce a product for the customer. Product can be a service, right? So product for the customer that can solve a problem for that particular customer, and you can do it profitably and at scale, right? So these three things at the high level come together. Then you have a recipe for success. Then everything else becomes coincidental, right? So of course, in order to rally the right people, you need to figure out the right strategy, where you get your right people and then compensate them. The other aspect is the company's culture, so that they can work together and so on and so forth, right? All this become coincidental, but these three things coming together, you have the right foundation to take your company where it wants to go. there is a saying in the management world that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? So culture pretty much is everything. So first of all, like I think there are a lot of different definitions about what is culture, and people make their own meanings out of it. But for me, culture is basically the least common denominator of the behavior that's acceptable in the organization. Right? So some very simple example that need not be the benchmark for everybody. But for example, let's assume that 8 a.m. is your in time in the work. Right? Most people don't go to office these days, but I'm just taking a pre-COVID example. Right? Suppose 8 a.m. you expect everybody to come. Right? So do you tolerate people coming in late? Right? That's a very simple example, but that sets the golden benchmark. Right? Even if somebody has left at 2 a.m. in the night, right? Because we have that and we follow that religiously, do you come back at 8 a.m. in the morning with the same energy, right? And if you're tolerant to somebody who's coming 5 minutes late, right, just because he's your favorite person, right, for whatever reason, then you're just breaking that, right? And that thing. So least common denominator of the worst behavior that you tolerate as an organization becomes a part of your culture. And not everything is written on the board, right? So a lot of them are just unspoken, right? For example, in this company, it's okay to not meet certain numbers, okay? In that, so if they have that as a culture, then unspokenly people know that, okay, it's acceptable to not meet my numbers, it's okay, right? But the moment you are super strict about it and call out bad behavior right then and there, even if he is the most important person in your organization, that's when it defines your culture and everybody else goes under. So culture are those behaviors that are absolutely expected and there is no tolerance acceptable. That's what defines the culture. Now, I believe that culture is like, that defines the companies that survive and thrive versus companies that do not. And that's because, and there is no good culture and bad culture, by the way. You have to have a culture that fits in your business model and the environment you're working in, and also to some extent the personality of the leader, right? So these two things define. So there is no good culture and bad culture, but you should have very clear perspective as a leader on what is that culture that you want to drive, and drive that religiously. That's the only way to keep your flock together and set a minimum standard for the behavioral benchmark. So, as we know in today's knowledge world, right? So, people are the most important asset that goes unsaid. All of us know about it. Right? So, the first question though is how do you find those right people? Right? And also in the latest management theory, as we know, right? It's more important to have the right people on board even before you define the right roles for them, right? So get the right people on board first, then we can figure out the right roles based on their skill sets and interests and motivations at that point in time in their careers, right? So having the right people is the most important thing that a leader should be doing in the organization, even more important than meeting his customer. Now, so how do you find the right people? So there are one set of aspects in terms of the right skill set and so on and so forth. That's basically the criteria for entry, right? So criteria for getting into the room in the first place. But beyond that, the question that I generally ask is, okay, if this person I'm thinking overall for this particular team, is this person, is she going to add more energy to my team, or is she going to reduce the average energy of my team? So that's like a dipstick test. That energy includes the amount of skill set that she brings to the table, amount of positive attitude she brings to the table, her ability to work with her peer group, right? And also her overall knowledge and perspective of this industry and ability to inspire her next layer and so on and so forth. It includes everything. It's the sum total of everything. So is this person going to add to the average energy of my team, or is she going to reduce the average energy of my team? And that has worked wonders for me. And again, because it's a sum total of a lot of different things that are softer and harder aspects of the personality. Now, once you have the right person on board, right? So then how do you keep them motivated, and how do you make sure that they are not leaving, right? So there are a few different aspects here. Of course, we talked about money and stuff like that. And my belief is that, of course, you should compensate your people really, really well. But money should not be the criterion for any person to either come on board or stay or leave. So once you have the right person on board for the right reasons in terms of what is the organization doing in the ecosystem, what is the problem that is solving for the customer or the world, right? That big motivation should be what should be keeping your people and make them motivated to come back every Monday morning. Right? And money should be just should take care of them enough so that money does not become a criterion for somebody to look out, right? So it should be compensated well enough so that doesn't become a criteria for anything, right? That's how. So you should be compensating well, but that should not be the reason for anything else. And then, what I've seen again over experience and some of my friends call it as the Srinidhi metric. So my metric to figure out are we keeping people motivated enough? Is how much of the person's mind share is going into thinking about the company versus thinking about herself. So if a person spends more time thinking about herself in terms of, okay, what's going to happen about my career here, or am I growing fast enough in this company, or okay, I was not called for that important meeting, okay, what's going on with me, right? So the person starts thinking about herself more than thinking about the company, then we have a problem, right? And either we are not keeping we don't have the right people, or we're not keeping them motivated, right? So that's probably have time to have a conversation. But of course, everybody should be thinking about themselves and the company, but your good people who are playing the right roles and having the right level of motivation will be thinking more, leaning more towards thinking about the company in a given day or a given week compared to how much they're thinking about themselves. And you can easily figure this out in your own conversations and so on. So that's my metric, if you will, for identifying if there is a risk of somebody leaving, or if somebody is not being treated well and we need to have a conversation to figure out how to help them. Yeah, that's actually a great question indeed. For a minute, let's assume that we have been successful in hiring the right people. If you have hired the wrong people, any which place you have to let them go. There is no other option. It was your mistake or the person's mistake, does not matter, right? So eventually you have to let them go, otherwise you will not survive as a company. So for a minute, let's assume that we have hired the right people on board, right? So now a different set of things will come, right? So first of all, the person, the direction in which the leader is going, versus the direction in which this person is going might not be aligned with each other, right? That's one set of circumstances. I call this as micro circumstances, where it is about the person, right? Or a person, in spite of being a good person and having a good record, is not able to deliver for whatever reason, right? So these are all micro reasons where it is concerned with the person. And then there are macro reasons, like what happened of late, the funding situation of startups kind of went into challenges, or there might be recessions and so on and so forth. These are all the macro situations, right? Let us deal with these two things differently. But first of all, if you figure out that there is a mismatch in terms of the person's direction or the performance or anything like that, right? Obviously, there is no other reason. I mean, there is no other option. You have to let the person go, because otherwise, again, it will be a sinking ship. You can't carry dead weight. But the thing is, can you as a leader make sure that none of this is coming as a surprise, first of all, right? And there is enough feedback loops between you and the employee throughout, right from the day one of the employee joining, so that any discordance between in terms of performance or in terms of the direction the employee is going, etc., is any discordance is immediately highlighted, and you can have open conversations, right? So that nothing of this sort comes as a surprise. So we call it as radical candor in our language, where you can have tough conversations but still not lose the relationship, right? That requires some amount of maturity on both sides. But the moment you're able to do it as a leader, then you have a winning relationship. So you might part ways. You might ask the employee to leave, or she might still leave without you asking, but you will still not lose the relationship, and she will go talk good things about you and the company. So one is good, the right expectation and very constant feedback loop, and radical candor in terms of discussing open issues. And also, last but not the least, unless you are letting go somebody for a reason related to integrity and stuff like that, can you provide enough support so that the person finds the next opportunity and settles well, right? So you need to provide a runway. You need to be human about those things, right? So these are the three things when it comes to micro reasons that I have found works very, very well. But on the other hand, there might be macro reasons where it's completely beyond your control, right? There is a major recession coming in, or whatever those things are. There is an inflation, and your cost of goods sold is increasing compared to your price that you can command, and so on and so forth, right? So wherever macro reasons come, so there are a few things that I always advise the startups to do, right? So one is that recessions are the best times for you to figure out your sweet spot and invest, so that you can come out stronger when things get better. Now that's much more easier said than done, because you need to have that kind of a runway in terms of your cash. So I believe the most important thing that any startup founder should be doing, or even business leaders of large organizations, is to have enough cash and enough runway in terms of cash for at least about 12 to 18 months. 18 months is what I generally suggest, so that these kind of macro things do not shake your organization in the immediate past, and you don't want to lose out on good opportunity and good people just because you didn't manage enough cash. So it's very important to run your organizations very, very lean, so that you're not wasting money on fluff, and you have enough runway for the organization. That's point number one. And point number two, again, goes back to what I was telling before, which is, if you have a single-minded focus as a leader on one vision, solving one problem at any point in time for the customer, right? Then you will not spread yourself across too thin across different projects, where you the moment something happens macroeconomically, you have to shut down 3 of the 5 projects because you don't have enough cash to do it, right? So it's important to focus your energies on one thing so that you have the right people on that. You can retain those people in case of a macroeconomic impact, and come out stronger out on the other side of the macroeconomic challenge. So these are the three things I would advise. But at the end of the day, if it is, especially if it is for a micro reason, or worst case you don't have enough cash, it's a macro reason, it is important to make that tough call. Okay, it's very hard to let somebody go. Please do that call. It's good for the employee and good for you, because if the company dies eventually, it's not good for anybody. So it's important to maintain the fact that it's a growing and profitable concern. But please be super human about it. But still, you should take the decision and have a radical candor kind of a conversation with the employee for this way or that way, the micro or a macro reason. So one thing is, as we were talking, one is having a single-minded focus at any point in time. It's not that you should not solve multiple problems, but not at the same time, right? Especially in the first few years of the organization. So single-minded focus on solving one problem for the customer and putting your resources into that, very effectively. That's point number one, right? And point number two, is about how do you make sure that you have enough runway and enough cash, so that your report does not topple for small macroeconomic impact, right? And then you're talking about founders being able to solve a larger problems than just making money, right? They should solve an important problem for the country or the economy or the ecosystem, so that others see value in it. And last but not the least, when we are talking about founders and leaders and having an impact and building great organizations, please think long term. It's very easy to take short term decisions and get the wrong way, but please always you will always face situations where you need to take a right direction or a left direction. And what has worked for many companies that I advise on is, if you always take a long-term decision in terms of what's good for the company in the long run, you're always likely to take a right decision compared to a wrong decision.